moving along. Okay, here we are. Just a point. There we so before we begin the Gemara, just to review, in the Chumash and in the Torah, we find often that you needed to use shni tailas, which was red crimson, crimson wool.
Can you make the Gemara large? No,
I will make the Gemara larger.
Okay.
I'm gonna get
No problem.
I'm gonna get to the Gemara. I just wanted to discuss. If you recall, in the Mishnah it says that they tied a red crimson on his on the horn of the goat that you're throwing off the mountain, the Azazel. Still a mystery why you're throwing a goat off a mountain. That's for the Satan. And then also you tie a part of the crimson on a piece of stone right next to the mountain where you're throwing him off. And the miracle was that after it got broken up into pieces that just flew down the mountain, this piece and that piece turned white. So that is I don't know if it's a Kabbalah thing that they put it on the cow's horn and the cow and a piece of rock. That's one. Then we learned in the Chumash another time that you need to have a shni toilas. If you recall, and this is why this Gemara is fabulous. The Gemara, the Chumash says that when a Metzora wants to become pure, the Kohen goes to the place where he is outside, checks out the nega on his body, and it looks like it got healed. It's not white as snow anymore. So then the Chumash says that you take two birds, two shtei tziporim chayes k'toris. You take an eitz erois, a piece of cedarwood, crimson wool, shni telas, and a hyssop. Okay. Then the Kohen says, and you shecht one bird, so into a blood that has water in it. So imagine you take one bird, slaughter it, now you have a cup of water, and then blood on top of it. You take the live bird, the Torah says, Ves eitz eres, you take the cedarwood with the live bird, with the cedarwood, and the red crimson, and the hyssop, ves ezev, and you dunk all of them into the blood. V'tovel oisam, so the live bird gets dunked into the blood of the shechted bird, and you wrap, by the way, the cedarwood and the hyssop was with the crimson wool was also wrapped together, and they also dunked into this blood. And then they spray from the hyssop and the cedarwood and this crimson onto the let's say the hand of the Metzora 7 times. And that's just the beginning of his purity process. And then they go back into the city and they shoo away the live bird. Okay, my point is that there's a crimson wool required by Metzora. Where else do you have crimson wool? By making the paraduma. Zois chukas, the Torah says, by the paraduma. Here the Chumash says, Zois, hello Lewis. Hi, we just began. Zois chukas ha-Torah. The Torah talks about making a paraduma. The Torah tells us that the paraduma has no, it's perfect. You give it to Elazar Kohen, and he shechts it. Now remember, paraduma was shechted where? On Har HaZeisim. Right. But after you shecht it, it's interesting that the blood has to be, you take it, if you remember, you had to take the blood and spray it towards the opening of the heichal. Noichach pnei oil moed. Then you burn it. You burn the whole thing. The skin, the hide, the flesh, the blood, along with the dung, yisraif, everything. It's turned into ashes. And in that fire, you have to throw, the Kohen has to throw eitz eres, a cedarwood, ezev hyssop, and shni telas, crimson wool, red wool. A tongue of red wool. That's basically it. And you throw it into that fire. That's what the Chumash says. And that's how you create Ephra Paraduma ashes. Now let's go back into the Gemara. We're beginning Membeis Amud Sheni, about 3 lines from the bottom. Very simple. Now the Gemara is going to fly. This is why this Gemara is, I think, quite incredible. Because the Gemara, we're going to start Ki Asur Avdimi. Here we are. Ki Asur Avdimi. Okay, we up to Membeis Amud Sheni. That's Membeis Amud Sheni, right? I think it's Mem Aleph Amud Sheni. I'm sorry, Mem Aleph Amud Sheni. Right, Mem Aleph Amud Sheni. 3 lines from the bottom. 41 B. 3 lines from the bottom. Okay. Ki asa Rav Dimi. Amar Rav Yochanan. Now, these tongues of wool are expensive. Basically, you know that they're very expensive. So you just can't waste money just buying them. So what the Gemara is now saying is the Gemara is going to ask a question. The Gemara is going to describe which one cost more. Kiyas Rav Dimi, Rav Yochanan. Rav Dimi went to Bavel and he said in the name of Rav Yochanan, his rabbi in Israel, Shalish l'shoyne shemati. There are 3 times you have to have tongues of wool. Achas shel para, one is the para aduma. Va'achas shel so'ir hamishtalech, one is the so'ir that was sent off the mountain as we described in the picture before. That you had to have crimson wool. Va'achas shel mitzora, and one type of crimson wool was for the mitzora purity process. And achas, so one of them mishkal asara zuz. One weighed, let's say 10 zuz. That was their weight. Va'achas mishkal shnei sloim. And one of them weighed 2 sloim, which is equivalent of saying 12 zuz. 12 zuz. I'm sorry, 8 zuz. 8 zuz. So you have 10. One is weighing 8. Va'achas mishkal shekel. And one is weighing 2. So 10, 8, and 2. Now, ve'ein li lefarish. I have no way to explain it. I don't know which one should weigh 10, which one should weigh 8, which one should weigh 2. And I'm not going to tell you, make them all weigh 10, because that's a waste of money. And we're dealing with hektish money, and you can't waste a dime. Okay? So how big should the crimson wool, who should have the heaviest wool? I would argue, by the way, that the Seir Mishtaleach should be the most expensive, because take a look. You have to have enough to wrap it around the horn and wrap it on the rock over here. So that should be the most expensive. You know, you have to get more wool for that. But then you could say that the paraduma has to be thrown into the fire, so it has to be has to weigh something. The shni talas. So the Gemara doesn't know which one should weigh more. He also Ravin, when Ravin came, he came from Israel, and he said it over Pershim Shmeid Rabbi Yonasan. He heard the shir and he explained it in the name of Rabbi Yonasan that shel para, the para weighs the most. Mishkal Asara Zuz. The para weighs the most. It weighs 10 zuz. V'shel shoyim mishtaleach. They had that had a weight of mishkal shnei sloyim of only 8. V'shel mitzora was just a one-time thing. Mishkal shekel, it only weighed 2 zuz. So again, it goes from the highest to the lowest. Para being the highest, mitzora the lowest, sar mishtaleach the middle. Again, just to save money for Hegdish. We didn't want them to overmake wool, so for para they made it just right. Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Pligi bought Rab Shimon ben Chalafta Rabbanan b'para." Actually, there's a machlokes between Rab Shimon ben Chalafta and the Rabbanan regarding para. Chad Omar, one said Mishkal Asara, the weight of the crimson wool was Asara regarding para aduma. The Chad Omar just the opposite. Mishkal shekel, it only weighed 2 zuz. Because again, with the paraduma, you're trying to just singe it in the fire. So you don't have to have so much wool. It could be a little bit of wool weighing only 2 shkolim. So it's a machlokes in the extremes. They're arguing, do you have, by paraduma, is it 10 or 2, the smallest amount? Certainly not 8. V'simonach, if you want to remember what the machlokes is all about, remember extremes. Echad hamarba, ve'echad hamamid. There's a famous statement regarding learning Torah. Whether you learn a lot or whether you learn a little bit, as long as your focus is l'shem shemayim, to get your shemayim from your learning. So it's echad amarba ve'echad amamit. By both extremes, God's pleased with both people as long as yichavein liboy l'shemayim. He makes his attention towards shemayim. So again, it's an expression that points out extremes. So we should remember that paraduma is a machlokes in extremes. Is it 10 or is it 2 shekels? Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah bedifta Ravina. Rabbi Yirmiyah from Difta said to Ravina, Loi bepara pligi. They're not arguing whether paraduma weigh 10 or 2. They're arguing el b'sa'ir hamishtalech pligi, regarding the crimson wool used by the sa'ir that you threw off the mountain. How much did that weigh? there the machlokes is whether it was 10 or 2. Again, it should be 10 because you need a lot of it to split it between the head of the goat and the rock. So now, Vahu Yoime Noch Nafshe the Ravya Bakisi. On the day of the argument, this great Talmud Chacham, Ravya Bakisi, passed away. Now, so that reminded us what they were arguing about. They were arguing about So'ir Mishtaleach, because just like when a great rabbi dies, it brings kapara. For people who have Averis, the day of a great rabbi dying, it brings kapara. So also, that reminded us that the day of the yahrzeit, they had an argument regarding I don't call it a carbon, regarding an item on Yom Kippur that had to do with kapara, which is the Stoyam Hamishtaleyach. Va'anche Beisamona, Rav Bar Kisei, the simon to remember what they were arguing is Rav Bar Kisei, the death of Rav Bar Kisei, who was a great sage. Mechape brings forgiveness, Kisoir Hamishtaleyach, like the So'ir that was sent off the mountain. So that reminded people to remember what they were arguing about. They were not arguing about Paraduma. They were arguing not about Metzaira. They were arguing about So'ir Mishtaleach, because that was the day of the death of Rav Bar Kisei, which is also a time of Kapara. Zot Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. By the way, there's a minhag to fast on the day that a person's parent passed away. That's also maybe because of Kapara that day, or also because the mazel is not good that day, so you fast as a protection. So just thought to point that out. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Okay, I'm going to point out to you, very simple. Here the Chumash says by Parah Aduma, v'nesatem oisei Elazar b'koyin, you bring the Parah Aduma to Elazar b'koyin, v'haitzi oisei l'chutz l'machne, he takes it to Har HaZeisim, v'shochet oisei l'fonov. Sounds to me that he's supposed to shecht it in front of himself, or somebody else should shecht it. We're not sure. Elazar seems to be the one shechting it. Then I'm going to point you another pasuk that we're going to deal with, the par hachatos that was brought on Yom Kippur. One of the avodas hapnim was that cow that you did vidui, a confession on his family. The kohen did on himself, his family, and the rest of the kahanim. And the Torah says, "V'shochat as par hachatos ashloi." He should slaughter it. And then the Torah says it should be chukas olam. It's a law that's forever, a statute. Now, normally shchita, we know in the Beis Hamikdash they didn't have kahanim do shchita. In fact, it was a lot of Yisraelim were allowed to do shchita because a zar is permitted to do shchita on a carbon. But it could be on Yom Kippur, the Torah is emphasizing that only the kohen gadol should shecht. So that's the discussion over here. Itma we learned shchitas para regarding the shechting of para aduma, uparoi, and his cow that he shechted on Yom Kippur. So the slaughtering processes is a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Chad Omar, one of them said para psula. The para aduma is puzzle if it's done by anybody but the kohen gadol. But paroi, his own cow on Yom Kippur, he didn't have to slaughter it. It's a mitzvah for him to slaughter it. But kasher, it would be kosher if a Yisrael shechts it, because generally a zar is kosher to shecht in the Beis Hamikdash. That's one opinion. But Chadama, the opposite. One said just the opposite. Paroi pesuloi, that his own cow on Yom Kippur, if the kohen gadol doesn't shecht it, it's puzzle. Para, but the para aduma, Kishera, it's kosher if anybody goes up on Har HaZeisim, shechts a paraduma, it does not have to be a kohen or kohen gadol. So that is the machlokes. So the Gemara says, Tistayim, I'm going to prove it to you. The Rav hu the Amma parapsula. Rav has a chiddush. Rav was the one that said a paraduma is puzzle if anybody but the kohen shechts it. Why? The Amar Rab Zera said, Shchitas parhara bizar pasula. Rab Zera said a shechting, the paraduma that was shechted by a non-kohen is puzzle. Now it's very interesting because in the Beis Hamikdash itself, any Yisrael could do the shechita, but if the Har HaZeisim paraduma, that is specifically needs a kohen. V'amar Rav Allah, and Rav explained what the rationale behind Rab Zera. Elazar v'chuka shenina ba. The Chumash says zois chuka satorah. Chuka means it's a law. You can't break one iota of what's written here. And the Chumash says Elazar is doing the shechita. In the Chumash, it's describing Elazar doing the shechita, who was a kohen, the son of Aaron. Therefore, paraduma can only be shechted by a kohen and not by Yisrael. So the Gemara explains Rav. V'Rav, my sheno para diksiv Elazar v'chuka. Why is a para you're strict that only a kohen could shecht? Because it says Elazar and it says the word chukah. So by para name, by the par of the kohen gadol or Yom Kippur, hoksiv, the Torah also says aharon b'chukah. Look at the pasuk. It says by the kohen gadol on Yom Kippur that Aaron brings the par and he should shecht it. And then the Torah says at the end, l'chuk asoilim, everything I said here in the Yom Kippur service in Parshas Achrei Mos is chok. You can't change it. So why doesn't Rav agree that the Kohen Gadol should be the only one that could shecht on Yom Kippur? Why does he say that it would be kosher if somebody else shecht? And for the Gemara, shchita lav avoidihi. Shechting is not considered a service. Services has to do with the mizbeach, sprinkling blood on the mizbeach, burning the carbon on the mizbeach. Shechting is a non-service item, and therefore it's kosher even if Aharon didn't do it. And chukah, the word chukah refers on the service part that's being done on Yom Kippur. That ihachi. So the Gemara asks back, paranami, by paraduma, shechting it on the Har HaZeisim is not really a service. So it should be kosher if any Zar would do it. Any Yisrael would shecht on the paraduma. So the Gemara says, Shani para, the kachem bedek habayisi. Para is different because this is kachem of not related to be the mizbeach. It has nothing to do with service of the mizbeach. It has to do with the Beis Hamikdash itself, but not with the mizbeach. And therefore, we are more stricter and say that it could only be performed by a kohen. So the Gemara asks, "V'lav kol dechenu, isn't it not a kal v'chomer? If a service that's brought on the mizbeach, such as the par of the kohen gadol Yom Kippur, is permitted to be shechted by a non-kohen, certainly paraduma, which is kachay bedek habayis, which is not mizbeach related, but the Beis Hamikdash related, you should allow it that a non-kohen could shech the paraduma." And for the Gemara, not true. Amar Rav Shisha ben Rabbi Idi, midi dehava amaris negoyim, the lav avoidihi ubayakuna. There's certain things, certain halachas in Chumash that have to do, that the Torah was strict, it cannot be done by anybody else, such as seeing a nega, seeing leprosy, and calling it tamei or tahar. The only one that could do that is a kohen. It's a service that's done, it's a procession that's done outside the Beis Hamikdash, and no matter the greatest Talmud Chacham cannot make a nega tamei or tahar. It's only a kohen could do that, and therefore we see service. There are some services that the Torah was strict that only a kohen could do it. So it could be shechting the paraduma. The Torah was very strict that only a kohen could do it, and not anybody else. So therefore, bottom line, Rav Shita is para pesula. Para is pasul if a non-kohen does it, but paraduma. Parai, the kohen gadol's carbon himself, which is brought on Yom Kippur, could be shechted by someone who is a non-kohen. Now, the Gemara now goes and examines Shmuel. L'Shmuel da'amay para psulai. Shmuel says the opposite, that his own cow is pasul. Ma'ishna parai. Why is his own par pasul if he shechts it on Yom Kippur? If it's a non-kohen does it. The ksiv Aaron v'chuka. The Torah says Aaron and chuka. That means only Aaron could shecht the par on Yom Kippur and nobody else. So the Gemara says par nami ksiv Elazar v'chuka. The Torah writes that it should be done by Elazar, and the Torah was strict about it. It calls it a statue. So why do you say that paraduma is permitted if a Yisrael would shecht it? So Shmuel answer, Shani Hosum, because the pasuk says the ksiv shachat oisoh lefonov, that the Torah says that the carbon the paraduma was shechted in front of Elazar. What does that mean? In front of? What does this lefonov mean? Sheizor sheich. It's possible for a non-kohen to shecht the paraduma, ve'Elazar roi'eh, and that Elazar has to observe. Not that Elazar has to shecht it. That's what Shmuel is going to learn. So that's why there's a special heter by paraduma that the Azar could shecht it. because it says lefonav, it's shechted in front of Elazar, but not Elazar doing the shechita. For Rav, how's Rav going to learn? Rav going to say v'shachat oisel lefonav means that Elazar does the shechita. But what does lefonav mean? That means in front of me, in his mental image, Elazar could not lose focus when he's shechted. He's not allowed to lose focus throughout the procession of paraduma. It's sort of like when you bake matzahs, you always have to think l'shem matzahs mitzvah. He had to think about what he's doing constantly. He had to have mindfulness, okay, while he's doing paraduma. That's what it means. But he is the one that's doing the shechita. Ushmuel, how does he know? How does he know that when it comes to paraduma, you're not allowed to lose focus? Talmud loyma, the nafke, he learns it because the Torah says v'soraf as a para le'enov. The para has to be burnt up in front of his eyes, which means his mind's eye, his mindfulness. The kohen has to see it. He has to visualize it constantly that he's working on the paraduma. But not necessarily does he have to do the shechita. But Rav disagrees. Rav says that the Torah is requiring you both by shechita and by sreifa that he should not lose focus. The Torah tells it to you twice. Rav chad b'shchita v'chad b'sreifa. Utzricha, I need both of them. The ikos of Rachmana b'shchita, if the Torah would only write by shchita that he has to focus, because that's the beginning of the service. That's why I say he should focus. Aval sreifa, eimoloi. But by sreifa, I would think that he doesn't have to focus because he's already in the procession. So if he starts thinking about something else, the paradum is kosher. Tzricha. That's why he needed to tell me that even by the burning by throughout the whole process, he should not lose focus. The ikas of Rachman Besreifa, the Torah just wrote by the burning of the paraduma, he should remember and keep mindful what he's doing. Mishum the hashta kumiskashre para. I would have thought only at the end he has to think about it, because at that moment it becomes ashes, it becomes a paraduma. That's why he has to have focus at that point. I might have thought al b'shchita emaloi. I might have thought that shchita he does not have to have focus. Tzricha, that's why I need both places. So it all boils down to this pasuk: v'shachat oiser lafonov. Shmuel learned that the paraduma is shechted in front of the kohen gadol, but not necessarily he's the one that's doing it. But Rav learns v'shachat oiser lafonov teaches you that the kohen had to shecht it, and lefonov means it has to be in his mental head that what he's doing, and he should not lose focus from the shechita, which is the beginning. And not only throughout, up until the sreifa, till the burning of the paraduma, he had to keep in mind of what he is doing. So the Gemara asked, "Lemutei mai." At what point will we be okay if the kohen starts thinking about something else? What service of the paraduma would forgive the kohen, so to speak, and say that it's still a kosher paraduma if he lost track of his mind? Ilemu, would you say lemutei asifas ephra, sweeping up the ashes? Umilimayim lekiddish, and filling up the water into the jug of water where you're going to put the ashes in the water, right? Because they filled up water and then they put the ashes and mixed them together. And that is a service of paraduma, because you then take that water and spray it on somebody who became tamei meis. So at that point you could lose focus. We go to Amid Beis, then Beis Amid Beis. Lemishmeres lemei midat ksiv. The Torah says you have to always preserve that it's purification waters, so spraying waters. So it seems from the Chumash that you have to have focus throughout this process of paraduma. You have to be very, very mindful of what you're doing. Ella, there's one time that if the kohen loses focus and his mind wanders, it would be okay. Lemute hashlochas eitz ve'erev ve'ezev v'shnitulas. When you throw the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the crimson, you throw that into the fire. If you lose focus, that's okay. The lav gufa the paraninu. That's not the body of the paraduma. That's an extra, ingredient that's thrown into the fire. But if the kohen would lose focus, that would be okay. But the Chumash is teaching you that the kohen, when he's making the paraduma, putting it together, sweeping the ashes, making the water mixture, he all had to be very mindful of what he was doing. Okay. Itmar. We learned another brisa. Shchitas, another teaching. Shchitas para bazara. The paraduma shechted by a non-kohen. Rav Ami Amar Kshera. Rav Ami says seems to be like Shmuel that it's kosher. Rabbi Yitzchak Napocha Amar Psula, it's pasul. Ula Amar Kshera. The Ula says a paraduma shechted by Yisrael is kosher. But Amri La Psula, and some say it's pasul. No, the two final things. Mosif Rav Yeshua Bar Abba Lasuyur de Rav. Rav Yeshua Bar Abba found a brisa that supports Rav. Rav said again that paraduma that is slaughtered by a non-Kohen is pasul. This brisa seems to concur with Rav. Why? Because the brisa says, the brisa wants to prove that everything has to be done by day. How do you know? Maybe you can make a paraduma at night. When you spray, I only have a chumash that the chumash only tells us spraying the water on a tameh, the paraduma one on tameh, that has to be done by day. Because there are two reasons. Because only a man could spray another person the paraduma waters. That the chumash says so. And the Torah says that could only be done during the day. Because the Torah says, Hu yischata boy bayayim shlishi. Torah says when you spray a tamei mace with the paraduma waters, it has to be done during the day. And only a man can be responsible spraying the waters. Nobody else. Not a woman. Menayin, how do I know l'rabah shchitasai? How do I know shechting the paraduma, the kabbalas damai, and gathering the blood, v'hazoras damai, and spraying the blood towards the Beis Hamikdash, usreifasa, and burning the paraduma, v'ashlochas eitz erev ve'erev shnitalas? How do I know that could only be done during the day? I know it has to be done by a man because the Torah says Elazar made the paraduma, Elazar, and it says man. So that I know it has to be done by a man. But how do I know that paraduma, the manufacturing of a paraduma, has to be done by day? Talmud loymit Torah. The Torah says Torah. All laws have to be the same. And just like we find spraying of the blood to be matar somebody has to be done during the day, also the manufacture of the paraduma has to be done during the day. Yochel, I would have thought Shani Maba Af Asefis Para Milamai Vikiddish. Talmud loymit Zois. I would have thought that I can include gathering of the ashes, sweeping, putting the ashes into a, box after it's burned and filling up water for the jug from the Mayim Chayim to make the kiddush, to mix the ashes. I would have thought that has to be done only by day. Talmud Loim is Zois. Zois tells you that only this has to be done by day, but not something else. So the Gemara says, so therefore you say the manufacture of the paraduma has to be done during the day. The sweeping up the ashes after it's done and filling up the water, that could be done at night. So the Gemara asks, why do you include one and exclude others? In other words, why do you include one that could only be done by day and the other ones can be done even by night? So the Gemara says, the Brisa continues, the Torah says, I'm including and I'm excluding. Amarta, I will say like this. I'm trying to learn everything from the spraying of the water on the tamei person. When you spray the water on the tamei person, a man is the only one that can do it. A woman cannot. It can only be done during the daytime. So also the manufacture of the paraduma, since I know for a fact it could only be done by a man, not a woman. So therefore, it has one thing similar to hazois memel that could only be done by a man and not a woman. So we say compare it totally to hazois memel, and we'll say ein kashera el b'yom. So also the manufacturing of the paraduma should only be done during the day. Umoitzi ani, and I would exclude asefes efra umila mayim v'kiddush, just sweeping the ashes, putting the ashes after the paraduma was done, and filling up a water to make the mixture. Since it did not have to be done by a man, it could be done by a woman. The actual sweeping up after you burnt the paraduma can be done by a woman. So therefore, that would also be kosher by day or by night. So ends the brisa. Now, what do you see? How is this brisa a refutation to Rav? How Rav said that paraduma could be shechted by a 9 kohen. All you see in this brisa is that a paraduma could be shechted
So it has to be by a man.
Right, it has to be by a man, not a woman. But maybe it could be only a kohen. So the Gemara says, what kind of question is this? So the Gemara says, this is the question. Since you find that it's possible by a woman, psula nami bizarre. So it's possible also by a non-kohen. It has to be a man, so it must be that it's possible for a non-kohen. So the Gemara says that's not true. Hazois meimeha techir. Prove it by when you spray a tame person, that's psulam be'isha. That's possible by a woman. Uksherim bizarre, but that's kosher by any Yisrael. They used to distribute these paraduma ashes with the waters to all cities in Israel. And every city had their own little ash thing. And that the one in charge spraying the Tamei Mason could be anybody, could be Yisrael, as long as it's not a woman, right? So therefore, say the same thing by shchita of the manufacturing, the shechting of the paraduma, though the Torah says it's possible by if a woman does it, but who says that it would be possible by a non-Kohen? Amar Abaye, Hainu Tiyufda. That's exactly it. Isha Maitama. How do you know that the shechting of a paraduma cannot be done by a woman? Because the Torah says Elazar. Elazar implies only Elazar, a man, and not a woman. V'lai Isha. So Zarnami, from that word Elazar, we derive Elazar, v'lai Zar. Elazar, and not a Kohen, which is Elazar family, and not a non-Kohen. So therefore, that is the end of the sugya, and the sugya closes off over here, and says that what that a kohen. This brisa proves that the only one that could shecht a paraduma is a kohen, not a Yisrael. One more piece of Gemara, and then we'll stop. Another minute. Amar Ula said, Kala kar shakula moitzi mashma moitzi miyad mashma. One pasuk tries to undo another pasuk, umashma memela, and one pasuk tries to agree with the next pasuk. As you know, by the way, that since there's no Masechta in Talmud Bavli of Para Aduma, there's no Masechta, so whenever we discuss things like this, the Gemara goes and starts, expanding on it, so because the Gemara knew it's not writing a new Masechta on Para Aduma. So the Gemara is just examining some of the psukim of Para Aduma. First pasuk says, "Unesatem oiso el Elazar HaKohen." The Para Aduma should be given over to Elazar HaKohen to do the process. Oiso la Elazar. Only the paraduma should be given to Elazar. V'loy l'doris le'Elazar. In the future generations, you don't have to give it to the kohen to Elazar. Now, Elazar was not the kohen gadol. His father Aaron was the kohen gadol. So, in future generations, you don't have to give it to the assistant kohen. Elazar was assistant. So, what's the din in the future generations? If we want today to make a paraduma, who would be the one doing the process? Ikad de Amri, some say that what we're saying over here is the doris b'kohen gadol. In the future generations, it must be done by kohen gadol, and this is very important. That the kohen gadol is the only one that could do the paraduma in future generations. The Ikad de Amri and others say the doris b'kohen hedyet. Only that generation it could be done by a kohen, by a sgan kohen. In the future generations, any kohen could do the paraduma. So the Gemara says, that makes sense. That nowadays, if I want to make a paraduma, a kohen hedyet, a regular kohen could do it. How do you know that in future generations that only a kohen gadol could do the paraduma? According to that opinion, where's the source for that? So he's going to have a source. Gomar chuka miyayim haKippurim. Here's a Gzeir Shava. It says Zois chuka satira. And it says the word chukah by Yom Kippurim, just like Yom Kippur could only be done by a kohen gadol, so also the paraduma can only be done by a paraduma. So they asked Avadia, I'll just end with this. They asked Reb Chacham Avadia Yosef, why can't we make a paraduma today? Can you imagine if we purified people from Tmei Meis, we could actually go on to Har HaBayis and build the Beis HaMikdash? Why can't we do that? So he said, because of what we're saying over here, because there is an opinion in the Gemara that seems to have a source that the paraduma can only be done by a kohen gadol. Now, in order to make a kohen gadol, we need a Sanhedrin that has smicha, and today we don't have a real smicha. So we can't make a Kohen Gadol, and therefore we can't make a paraduma. Because we can't make a paraduma, we can't go on Harabayis and we can't build the Beis Hamikdash. But it all boils down to this Gemara over here.
Thank you so much.
Okay, very good. Mitzvah Shem, we continue tomorrow on this paraduma again. It's a sidetrack, but it's stuff you'll never find anywhere.
Okay.
Okay, very good. A good Nacht.
Good night.